Welcome to Conversations with the Planets with Lori Kaufman and Alicia Sielheiser, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And today we have our friend Hannah Piper Burns here on the podcast. I first met Hannah at NORWAC in 2023 doing a workshop with Jason Hawley. And then Lori and I both got to hang out with Hannah at an asteroid retreat with Demetra George in Palm Springs back in December as well. So, yeah, welcome, Hannah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure. And it's just great to keep the conversation going. I had such a blast in Palm Springs. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And so
Yes.
you're an astrologer and an artist. Do you want to share just a teeny bit about kind of your practice and what you do?
Sure. I like to call myself an extra mundane anthropologist of my culture's phenomena, detritus, kitsch, and trauma. And I really subscribe to the axioms not either or, but both and yes, and as above, so below. And yeah, I come to astrology from first a writing background. I have Sun, Mercury, midheaven in Virgo, and that was I've always been a writer, and then I later on in life sort of stepped into the identity during my first node return, stepped into an identity of like an artist specifically, and I have my degrees in art and art history and new genres, which is it's what is that? I don't know exactly, but conceptual art. And so I come to astrology really seeing it as an art in the way that, you know, in the Renaissance, math and art and music and astrology and magic, it's like all kind of the same thing as Renaissance and before.
Yeah.
But I see it, you know, I see it as both again as like an art in terms of that it's like something that you're interpreting, right? And I see the consultation a lot like a studio visit or a critique where there's sort of a covenant, and you're using this mediating object to talk to this person about their practice, which is like life, right? And so how can you be helpful? How can you make sure they feel ultimately like the authority, you know, like just as like when you're receiving a critique for an art piece, like at the end of the day, you have to have the confidence in yourself to know like if you're going to take that critique, like if that critique is applicable. So with all that said, I practice a lot of lunar magic, and I also used to have a podcast where I looked at astrology through the lens of reality TV.
Oh,
Very cool.
interesting.
Reality TV has taught me a lot about astrology, especially about dignity. Yeah.
Mm. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that and for coming on. You're our first guest on the podcast, and a big part of our podcast is really weaving different modalities and different perspectives and conversations together. So it's really exciting to have you here. And at the retreat with Demetra, a lot of what she had us do was share our personal asteroid stories. And so we would love to kind of chat about that with you a little bit. For our listeners, we have another episode on just like asteroids 101 to talk about like what are asteroids, how to interpret them, how to look them up in the chart. But Hannah has a really interesting connection with, is it Philomena? Is that the correct pronunciation?
Philomela, I believe. It's with an L and not an N.
Philomela.
Philomela, yeah.
And so yeah, it would be really lovely to just like hear your story with like that asteroid and how that showed up in your life.
Sure. Yeah, thanks again for giving me the space to tell this story. And I just want to preface it with a trigger warning. Like many myths, it is violent and it involves sexual violence as well as just actual violence, physical violence, and it's a story of a woman who was raped by the husband of her sister. And when she threatened to expose him for what he had done, he cut her tongue out and left her for dead in a cabin. So he had come to get her from her homeland at the behest of her sister, who was like, "I miss my sister. Can you bring her to me to visit?" And in the process of bringing her, he decided that he was going to violate her. And so while she was alone in this new land, without the ability to speak, she wove the story of what happened to her into a tapestry and was able to send it to her sister. And her sister, who thought she was dead, her husband told her she was dead, received this tapestry and learned what had happened to her sister at the hands of her husband. And she rescued her sister, and together they enacted like a horrible revenge on this man, which involved feeding him his own son, which is, again, very, very much in the vein of these myths. And this asteroid is conjunct my ascendant at 24 degrees Scorpio. And when I read this story, it really struck me as someone who comes from an art background that, like, this is a story about using art to speak the unspeakable when you cannot say what has happened for one reason or another. And it is about vengeance, but vengeance can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, right? Like it can be interpreted as justice. It can be interpreted as simply like transforming yourself. Like it can be an internal process as well as an external process, right? And so this idea of using a creative solution and using specifically art, and actually someone else at the retreat that I was talking to mentioned that she had read somewhere that anytime weaving is mentioned, it also means poetry. And I thought that was really beautiful, this idea of like and that the fact that Philomela specifically made this like weaving. And on a personal note, like I said, I do a lot of kind of experimental media, conceptual art. And one piece that I made in particular was a interactive installation that I created in the Unity game engine. So it was kind of like a video game. And it was controlled by controllers that I made out of modified sex toys. And it spoke to this idea of like a memory palace for shame and rage. I was sort of using it to process a lot of stuff that had happened to me that I could not really talk about openly and did not want to share about because it was like deeply humiliating and shameful and hard, right? And so like that story, I don't know if anyone would know how it would resonate with me until they told it. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those kind of, that's kind of the magic of astrology too, is like not assuming that you know why something's somewhere, but just sort of giving someone else the space to feel the resonance and for themselves potentially. And Yeah, interestingly enough, I mean, it's also like in reading and unpacking this myth, it's also sort of about censorship, obviously. This idea of like um,
Mm.
uh, cutting someone's tongue out so that they can't say something. It
Right.
has to do with both witness and censorship. And interestingly enough, like I also, when I was in college, like I made a series of photographs that was like censored from a show for being too
Mm.
controversial. And it was about, again, it was about um, female shame and rage, um,
Mm.
which is a like a recurring has been a recurring theme for me in my
Yeah.
work. Um, and I also, it's interesting uh, that I also have like the muse of um, epic poetry uh, weaving conjunct my sun, and then the muse of tragedy conjunct my chart ruler. So my
Mm.
ascendant ruler Mars is
Mm.
conjunct Malpomene, who's the muse of tragedy.
Yeah.
And I
I
see
have
that,
that one.
yeah, you
Sorry.
have that too.
I have that one conjunct my ascendant.
Oh wow. Yeah. And like tragedy to me is so, and it's probably because I have my ascendant rulers Mars and Sagittarius. So like to
Mhm.
me, there's something like if I don't, if I don't do something with this, whether it's make a joke out of it or make something like wisdom, if I don't get the wisdom or the humor from this, it will kill me, you know?
Right.
Um, and so I think that that's something that that really informs my art practice. Is like my art practice is
Yeah.
like really stems from um, that impulse.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful in the sense of like astrology being a language and art being a language as well, and being able to like really use and combine the two. And I have Pluto in my fifth house, so I think about that a lot. Anyway, like how can you almost like transmute pain into art and like create something with it, like use it as the fuel for choreography or movement or um, literal art or painting or writing or anything. Like how
Mhm.
can you transmute art from grief and sadness and pain, and how can those things all be kind of tied together as a language, as one thing?
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
totally. And again, you know, I think when I think about astrology, it is about like seeing a pattern in a
Yeah.
chart, and sometimes you'll see the same like in a different in different signatures, you'll see the same thing said in different ways,
Right.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Totally.
And so like
Always.
you could say like, oh yeah, you have Philomela conjunct your ascendant, and there's this like story, right? I
Yeah.
also have Venus in Libra in the 12th. So like that is it's like a it's
Yeah.
almost like a way to dig into that signature more, or like, and again, I wouldn't
Sure.
necessarily make that connection right away, but as someone who like knows, who like lives with that Venus and knows what it's like to have a 12th house
Sure.
Venus, that is very much connected to like um fear of expression, or like there's a
Yeah.
anxiety around like it expressing
Mm.
itself fully or it being hidden, and like
Yeah.
there's like a rhyme there, and you can sort of like start seeing these
Yeah.
rhymes.
Well, and Venus's story is really not that far off from this one either. Because Venus had also been raped and then had gone to her husband and like said, "Look what happened to me, help me." And he basically was like, "Well, I don't want you anymore." And so there was like very heavy themes in Venus's story that had to deal with very similar things. And um, that idea of justice, which is Libra, right? That's where like that Libra side of Venus comes out. But justice isn't always like happy go lucky, like whereas I feel like almost the Taurus side of Venus can be perceived that way, but like the Libra side is almost this like, how can I get revenge type of Venusian energy. Like that it really shows the duality of it.
Yeah, it's that Saturnian like
Sure. Yeah.
Kind, but not
The
naive.
exaltation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and this like kind of that,
Yeah.
yeah, clear-eyed, like, if it doesn't balance out, it goes. Um,
Right. Like it's still Venus, so it's beautiful, but also there's a darkness to it. And it's like sometimes you need that darkness to become beautiful. Like it can't, they don't go hand in hand.
and the Greeks really thought, that the universe was a like harmonious order. And
Right.
so beauty and truth and justice, like Libra, for Libra, like beauty, truth, justice, it's like all the same thing. Um, but yeah, and it just occurred to me that this piece I made, which is like again, it's like this idea that like by creating a virtual space that's like a memory space, and that by like making that space real, being able to encounter it and traverse it to like be able to overcome it and like handle it, that it was literally a cave. And this was like before I knew that I had a 12th house Venus, that I made this piece about
Wow.
um like traversing this kind of space of where I was like holding this memory, and like where it was being kind of crystallized and concretized.
Mm.
Wow.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah. That 12th house
your
isolation
story.
too, really coming out.
Yeah, Philomela being isolated in her
Yeah.
cabin too, and like the art's always, it's been like hard for me sometimes to feel like I have a healthy relationship with it for that reason. Like it's always sort
Sure.
of
Mm.
something that I do in like extreme, it's sort of like hole up for hours at a time in
Yeah.
extreme isolation and go into my cave.
Right. Sure.
Um,
Like the house of self undoing.
Right. Right.
yeah,
Literally.
yeah. And that too,
Mm.
like the idea that,
Imprisonment.
yeah, and imprisonment and yeah, there's like a bird, there's a bird reference too with Philomela, because after, I guess after they feed, in some tellings of the myth, like after they feed the husband's son to him, and um he finds out that that's happened, and they're like, we know what you did, and this is what we've done to you. All three of them turn into birds
Mm.
Hmm.
and fly away. And
Interesting.
I think that's interesting. Like I haven't really sussed out that connection in my own life. But I think that idea of like,
Freedom.
yeah, and like once you tell your story, like you're set free by it, like, or you're
Yeah.
transformed, like you become
Yeah.
different. Like you're
Like the
you're just different.
metamorphosis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Being able to share and like show what it meant to you.
Yeah, changes you.
Yeah.
And it's like she went from having her tongue cut out to being like a songbird too, which is beautiful.
Mm.
Yeah. There's definitely a metaphor in there.
A different voice. It's almost like
Mhm.
Odin, it's like you give something
Mhm.
up to get something else.
Right.
In her case, it wasn't voluntary. I mean, Odin's obviously was voluntary, but that's sort of,
Sure.
I always think of that as the difference between the hero's journey and the heroine's journey, right? Like the
Mhm.
hero's journey is like, well, Joseph Campbell's covered it, right? It's the quest, and you get your mission, and you find your allies, and you leave home, and but the heroine's journey is like, oh, you fall down the rabbit hole, you get sucked up in a tornado, you get kidnapped to the underworld, like, and so it's like,
Yeah.
uh,
Less choice involved.
less choice involved. Like, okay, now I'm here. How do I deal with these circumstances?
Sure.
So it's, yeah, it's almost like Philomela is sort of the heroine's version of the Odin um,
Mm.
myth.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's almost like the feminine versus the masculine version of it too, where almost there's like a more choice in the masculine, but like it almost like happens to the feminine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like the freedom and the hope of like the new beginning, like the fool's journey, um, feels very symbolic to like them becoming birds at the end too. Like, let's just like fly away and pretend like this never happened. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And
So
it's like
interesting.
you can't, also sometimes the way that like, you know, as someone who came from a writing background and like I write for a living, everyone told me when I was a kid, you're going to be a writer. And you like internalize
Yeah.
that, right? And like even when I was in
Right.
art school, like it was literally like I'm in school to get my master's in fine art and people are telling me like why aren't you just writing? Like you're so much the implication being like you're so much better at it.
Mm,
Um and I didn't really know what to say, except that like this is something that I need to do. But it's I used to have a lot of text in my work and
mm,
as part of my work, and I think that like I started realizing at a certain point that like language is not useful to me anymore. Like I can't
mm.
use language to talk about what I want to talk about. I have to use something else. And so like that idea of
Yeah.
like the birds, like I my tongue's cut out. I have to sing like a bird or I have to weave it or something.
Right.
Language is not available to me anymore.
Well, and birds
Mm.
can symbolize peace too. So maybe there's like a peace in being able to like let go after you share it.
Hmm.
I think too, it's just like this whole conversation is a really good example of how astrology can be such a helpful tool to talk about those unspeakable things and to
For sure.
Yeah.
understand them
To
and to
put the
see how those
language to it.
stories exactly, and that's sometimes can be where the language comes from. And especially, we're
Yeah.
talking about like a couple dark house things here with the 12th house, Venus, Libra stuff, and then, the ruler
Yeah.
of your ascendant being in the second, and this happening with, in your ascendant. And it's like the dark house stuff, the stuff that you can't really
Mhm.
see from the point of the ascendant. But then, like, as Cameron Allen has pointed out in a workshop I went to with him, like with astrology, we can see it. Like now you can see your Venus in the 12th, right? Like you can see
Right.
her
You
in
can
an
see her.
astrological lens.
Yeah.
And it helps provide this kind of therapeutic distance in some ways too of, now you're talking about the story of
Yeah.
Philomela, and how you connect to this story, and that can take, some really painful, difficult things that are like so real in your lived experience, but they can also like connect you to this more global thread of you're not the only one who has
Yeah.
unspeakable experiences as well.
For sure.
Yeah. And when I think about the eighth and the 12th house, and this is like slightly off topic, but still the way I think about it, I have a lot of eighth house energy in my chart, and my sun is in my eighth house. And somebody had told me once that like they described the sun, especially in the 12th house, as being when you're driving to work and you're being blinded by the sun,
Mm-hmm.
like during sunrise. And then the eighth house is when you're driving home from work and you're being blinded by the sun during sunset. And that is something that I think about constantly. It's like the eighth house, my sun especially, but like any planet there, it's blind because it's so like it's a blind spot because it's so bright. Like it's
Yes.
literally so there, so in front of you that it's blinding you. Like you can see that the sun is in the eighth house. Like it's not like it's a complete dark spot, but like it's so bright that you can't look. And it very much like fades out a lot of that energy. And I feel like even planets like Venus could be considered there too. It's like it's still it's a blind spot because it's so obviously in front of you.
Hmm. Hmm. And also it's like other people can sometimes see it.
Yeah,
Um, you can't. Um,
right, right,
like
Especially with the 8th and 12th houses,
yeah.
they're up above the horizon.
right. Yeah, like that eighth house, that 12th house, like you can see it so clearly, but like sometimes you don't realize you're doing it almost.
Mm-hmm.
And then that also being part of what's so helpful with astrology, because then if you get an
Mhm.
astrology reading or you're learning the theories and reading your own chart, and then you're getting this descriptive language for something you've always felt and something that's always
Yes.
been your own internal experience, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh wait, you can see that in the chart, like it's there,
Yeah.
you know, and it can just,
Yeah.
like for me, because I have a lot of dark house placements and a lot of like just difficult, painful things in
Mhm.
my chart, as I think a lot of us do, because life is really hard, turns out.
Yeah.
But the more I've
And
learned
that's
about
why we're astrologers.
but the more I've learned about astrology, the more I felt affirmed that like my experiences aren't like they're supposed to be that way. Like I'm
Right.
experiencing them. I'm getting astrology that's affirming that that is my experience. And now it's just like,
Yeah.
okay, I know who I am. And I just have to be that and live that, which
Yeah.
is,
Right.
the true
Right.
dance of life, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and that was like, I think that was the most influential thing anybody has ever even said to me about my chart or like in all of astrology. It was like, oh my God, like my sun is in the eighth house blinding people. Like,
Mm,
like it was just one of those moments where you're like, oh my God, like that is, like how can you not dim it, but like be aware of it?
mm,
Yeah. That's I that's super interesting. And it's like just going back to astrology as an art for a second, like,
mm,
Yeah.
you know, there are many ways to interpret a chart, and like I think of it as like many artists have many different kinds of techniques, just like many astrologers have many different techniques.
Absolutely.
And those techniques kind of relate back to their worldview and like their schema for understanding the world. And
Mhm.
so in that way they're all valid. Like it's important for the concept to hold and like be a holistic, like solid framework, right?
Yeah.
But like there are some people who will like resonate with a beautiful impressionist painting of a tree, and
Mhm.
some people who want the black and white silver gelatin print of the tree, and will pull different. Some people would be very emotionally like affected by one or the other.
Yeah.
Sometimes that depends on the chart as well. um and that's something I've been trying to think about a lot when reading too, is just like how to see that in someone, like how to talk to their placements in a way that will resonate with them.
Yeah.
that's beautifully
Yeah.
said.
Absolutely.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time as well, because we did have a little bit of like a time commitment with how long we were going to be here.
Yeah,
So,
and I could do this all day, and I will.
yeah.
Same.
So watch
I
out.
know I'm like, tell me more about your asteroids.
Yeah, exactly. I really I just am so grateful for the connection that we've made in this practice, and like being able to look forward to seeing you at Norwalk, and just seeing what comes of this project and everything else that y'all have going on. So
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Hannah. And also, speaking of
Yeah.
Norwalk, if anyone listening is coming to Norwalk this year, please come say hi. Please let us know, because that's, and also if you're thinking about going to Norwalk, go, because
yeah,
that's where I have made so much
Yeah.
community. That's where Lori and I met. That's where Hannah and I met. Like so many of my astrologer friends. That's where I like realized that I could be a practicing astrologer and do the thing. It was like being inspired by so many other people who are
Yeah.
out here practicing astrology in Norwalk, and just having community and coming together is just so so important. So yeah,
it will
thank
feel
you,
like,
Hannah,
yeah, totally.
for
Yeah,
coming on here.
my pleasure. Yeah, Norwalk's gonna feel like if you haven't been speaking your first language forever, and all of a sudden it's like you've been traveling and you've been speaking your second language, and then all of a sudden you're in a room full of people that speak your language, and all you're gonna
Yeah.
want to do is talk. Speak your
Yeah.
language with
Mhm.
people
You
and
feel understood.
understood finally. So
Yeah.
um yeah, can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And in the meantime, do you have anything going on? What kind of work are you doing right now?
Yeah, right now I have a lot of different studio projects brewing, and nothing quite concrete. And if you're interested in talking astrology with me, you can find me on Instagram. That's the best way to get a hold of me right now. So uh, love to talk anytime. Love to talk.
Awesome. What about you, Lori?
No big projects going on right now. I've got a lot of transformational things going on in my life here in Cincinnati. I just finished up a Valentine's Day deal and am always working on um just doing more readings and was offering a discount on the asteroid readings, so I'll still honor that if you want to reach out and yeah.
How much is the discount?
It's 20% off.
Nice.
Awesome. That's a
Yeah.
good deal. People should take advantage of that because getting
Yeah.
an asteroid reading that when I got a reading
They're a
from
lot of
Michael J.
work.
Morris, yeah, it that like lit up my understanding of asteroids and pointed out so many asteroids that were present in my
Hmm.
life. And so you should definitely get one with Lori if you're enjoying learning about the asteroids there. Like Lori said, they're a lot of work. They're really worthwhile to get. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely would encourage folks to do that.
Likewise.
Hmm. And what about
Awesome.
you?
I am not doing much right now because it's winter, so I'm resting. But I have been working on some writing on my blog about how to communicate with our ancestors, how to communicate with plants, different monographs about different herbs. So there will be a link to all of these, all the ways to get involved with us down in the show notes. But there will be a link to my blog there if anyone wants to go learn about plant communication and ancestral veneration and things that I've been thinking about in these dark months of winter.
Yeah. And we also do have an Instagram now. So follow
Mm-hmm.
us and feel free to shoot us a message too if you want to see anything, have any questions about anything you want us to answer, any podcast episodes that you want to see, anything you want to learn more about, or if you even just want to say hi to us. Yeah, feel free to reach out.
Thanks
Awesome.
again.
Thanks, everyone.